President Trump marking his 74th birthday Sunday with a $14 million haul, the single best online fundraising day ever for the RNC and his re-election campaign. The GOP war chest continues to dwarf the Democrats' coffers, at least what they've raised so far, despite a surge in donations for the DNC in May. Let's bring in our panel. Trump Campaign Communications Director Tim Murtaugh and Leslie Marshall, Fox News contributor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Tim, I want to start with you. I mentioned the president's birthday. You had Flag Day over the weekend. There was this initiative by the Trump campaign to get people out on their boats in battlegrounds like Michigan and Florida. We saw all this trending online where people were not just flying the American flag. They were trying to fly, I guess, their MAGA flags and whatnot. What were you trying to show in terms of enthusiasm?
Well, we see all that kind of enthusiasm all the time, and these boat parades are very often not something that the campaign organizes. It's people just in an impromptu manner wanting to show their support for the President of the United States and for his policies. You know, we know that the President engineered the greatest economy that people had ever seen before the global pandemic interrupted it, and there's great enthusiasm for the President and his policies. And that's what we're seeing now, the pent-up enthusiasm as we head towards this rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma on Saturday. Over 1 million ticket requests, and as you mentioned, $14 million raised in just one day on Sunday for the president's birthday. Fantastic enthusiasm all across the board. We've got an army, and we're going to have 2 million volunteers fanning out across the country, knocking on doors and making phone calls. And over the weekend, we made 3 million volunteer phone calls, and that's something that Joe Biden just can't touch as far as enthusiasm goes.
Okay, those are impressive numbers, but Leslie, I noted that in May, Joe Biden saw a surge in his own fundraising. I'll put on the screen where we are big picture. Through April, again, it doesn't include the May numbers, RNC Trump campaign, $253 million in the bank. DNC and the Biden campaign, just $97 million in the bank. And now we hear that Barack Obama is going to come and do his first fundraiser for Joe Biden. Where are we?
Well, I'm going to take Tim's enthusiasm and raise it on the Democratic side because, $80 million, over $80 million in May. One day with Elizabeth Warren, just yesterday, $6 million, 3.5 with Kamala Harris. Democrats are uniting. Democrats have energy and enthusiasm. And I think if you just look at the number of turnout in the state of Georgia and their primary as an example, what we have now is if you show up at protests on the left or if you show up at rallies on the right, unless those people vote, that's not really going to matter. But you know what? Money doesn't always matter, because when we look at 2016, Donald Trump won the election, but he lost the money game. So could it happen again? Yes. Would I like to see Joe Biden with more money as a Democrat? Absolutely. But I think not only is the enthusiasm for Joe Biden out there when we see the numbers of voters coming out, but I think those people are going to start writing more checks. And when Barack Obama comes out, to your point, Ed, that's certainly going to help the former vice president.
Tim, fair point that this president was outspent big time by Hillary Clinton back in 2016. And yet obviously still won. Today, as you know, marks 5 years to the day that he first descended from that escalator, I should say, in Trump Tower. Not a lot of people were betting that he was going to win. The DNC is out with a brand new ad about the escalator. I'm going to give you a chance to react. Tim, watch.
5 years ago, Donald Trump descended to the basement of Trump Tower. For the last 5 years, he's brought America down with him. You have the power to end the descent of our nation, to choose justice, unity, leadership.
A little bit of a taste of where they're headed in this campaign. Tim, your thoughts?
Well, I would say that if Joe Biden and his allies think that Joe Biden is an agent of change, then they've picked the wrong candidate. I mean, here's a guy, if he wants to talk about the civil unrest and the rioting that's been going on in American cities nationally, and he thinks that there is something to be done about policing in these communities, then why didn't he do something about it for the 40 years that he's been in Washington? And today we'll see President Trump signing an executive order talking about safe communities and safe policing. And the president, as we know, is in his first term, and he's doing this already. He's taking the anger that Americans really feel and instead turning it into action. And that's what leaders do. Leaders don't sit in Washington for 40 years doing essentially nothing and then run around from his basement saying, oh, this is what I would do. Well, he's had 40 years to do it. Why didn't he do it before now?
Leslie, fair question. Joe Biden, I remember covering him. He was chairman of the Judiciary Committee. They oversee policing. They oversee justice. All of these criminal criminal justice issues, and then he was vice president for 8 years. And this is certainly, the recent police shootings are not the first ones. We had Ferguson, all kinds of other shootings back in the Obama days. Not their fault, but what did they do about it? What did he do as vice president for 8 years to try to improve the situation?
First of all, I don't think many vice presidents do much except they stand next to the president and they go when the president can't be there. If you look at his years prior to that as a senator and all of his years in Congress as well, it's a fair question. But we didn't have the climate in the country then that we have now. And the climate in the country now, if you look at the polls, you have the majority of Americans who are with the protesters, who favor the protesting. You have, and those are Republicans as well, majority of Americans who are very disturbed by Mr. Floyd and feel what happened to Mr. Floyd is happening too much. I don't think that Americans want a military state, and although there are about 37% that like the president's law and order idea, the majority think it's a great TV show, but they want to have some kind of a better relationship and reformation of the police, a reformation, not this gavel of law and order, somebody who can bring the country together. So when you speak of change, that is the change that they want, not a change going back necessarily to the Obama years when Joe Biden was his vice president, but going forward to have a country that is united, because right now our country is very divided.
But I'm not sure your first point about vice presidents don't do a whole lot is going to be your best case there, Leslie. Tim, I'll give you the final word.
I was going to pipe up there, Ed. That's an interesting admission there from Leslie that Biden, all he really did was stand next to Barack Obama. That's not the way we hear Joe Biden tell it. And as a matter of fact, Joe Biden does own the worst recovery since World War II, and he owns his terrible policies that he'd put in place on the economy. He says the first thing he'd do is raise taxes, which of course is an economy killer, and he'll also impose the Green New Deal on businesses trying to recover.
Leslie, I'm out of time, but do you want to rephrase that Joe Biden was just standing beside Barack Obama?
I'm just saying vice presidents don't typically put forth legislation. That's something that comes obviously from Congress and the president and the vice president, even Mike Pence. What legislation has Mike Pence pushed through?
Well, he did run the task force.
I haven't seen it for most vice presidents.
That's not
their role.
Coronavirus, right, Mike Pence?
Well, that's because he was appointed by the president to do so, because the president couldn't or chose not to do that.
Leslie, Tim, appreciate your time.
Yeah.